big league. Huge. Really large.
I have a feeling it's going to be beautiful.
Welcome to Texas.
Big league. Big, huge.
Per capita, the biggest in the whole country. Nobody would know that.
I always call it massive. Sometimes they say huge.
Welcome to Texas.
All right, welcome to the Big Texas Podcast presented by Texas Young Republicans. I am your host, Jordan Overturf, back again with another guest who is in the trenches of Texas politics, who's going to be talking about our next generation of leaders and some very important events that are coming up to help change the shape of Texas politics, at least for the next 2 years. I'll get to my guest here in a minute, but we have a bit of housekeeping to take care of. Texas statewide deployments. Our YR deployments are beginning this weekend. Here's the schedule for you so you can keep up. We have this weekend a regional weekend of action. You can contact your local clubs, either your YR chapters or your local county GOP, to find out how you can get involved, or reach out to specific campaigns, find out how you can be part of their day of action, getting out, knocking doors, talking to voters, finding out what are the issues that are going to be driving them to the polls this fall, and making sure that they have a plan to vote on or before November 8th. After that, we've got our very first targeted deployment, August 26th through 28th, Monica de la Cruz in CD 15. After that, we've got Wesley Hunt, CD 38, September 9th through 11th, heading to the Houston area. This is covering Jersey Village and Tomball. September 16th through 18th, Cassie Garcia, CD 28. This is challenging entrenched Democrat incumbent Henry Cuellar. Again, CD 28, Cassie Garcia, September 16th through 18th. October 14th, we've got another regional weekend of action. Again, contact your local YR chapter or clubs to find out how you can get involved. October 21st through 23rd, we have a national deployment for Herschel Walker. This is the U.S. Senate candidate in Georgia. This is a big national deployment with the national YRs, sending YRs from across the country there to Georgia to help knock doors, make sure that Herschel Walker gets all the support he needs to take that seat back. And then finally, October 28th through 30th, Myra Flores, our congresswoman down on the border. A reminder that we are trying to help her win a full term in Congress. So she has to win this general election coming up. She's already our congresswoman. She won that special election, but if she wants to go back for 2 full years, we got to make sure that she wins big on November 8th. For all that and more, make sure you head to texasyr.gop. That is our website. Follow Texas YRs online, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Texas YRs. That's it. My guest today is none other than Mason Morgan. He is the executive director of Run GenZ. This is an organization that was started by a young Iowa state rep who knew Mason in his younger days. I say younger, I mean, the guy is much younger than me and much more accomplished, but this is a great conversation with Mason about Run GenZ, what they're trying to do, not just here in Texas, but across the nation, with the next generation of leaders. So Mason, thank you for taking the time to join us. For those who don't know about Run GenZ, can you just go ahead and give us, a primer on what your organization is, what you're out there doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on, Jordan. And so Run GenZ, I feel like it's always easiest to describe by giving you guys kind of the backstory from its original conception. And so, I went to college up in Iowa. I'm a Dallas native and grew up here. I went to school in Des Moines, Iowa, where I actually got connected with a young gentleman named Joe Mitchell. And so Joe and I worked together in the Iowa Senate, but we were mostly just kind of social buddies in college, right? And I graduated back in 2017. And then beginning of 2018, probably March or so of that year, I get a call from Joe. And I step out of my office. At the time, I was working for Senator Cornyn here at his Dallas office. Step outside, and Joe says, "Hey, I need your support." And I go, "Well, what could you possibly need my support for?" And Joe tells me, "So I'm going to run for Iowa's 87th district up in Iowa, in southeast Iowa, Mount Pleasant, for anybody listening that knows." And Joe tells me, look, his predecessor had been there 24 years and was retiring, so longer than Joe had been alive. He was actually 20 at the time. still a junior at Drake University. And I had every excuse for him in the book. Well, hey, don't you need a college degree? Don't you need more life experience? So on and so forth. And eventually, after I asked enough questions, Joe ended up hanging up on me. Didn't respond as kindly as I thought he would to my questions. And so I don't hear from Joe for about 3 months' time. Finally hear back from him, and it was essentially to rub it in my face. He said, look, I won my primary by 100 votes. I went out, I knocked on the doors, I made the phone calls necessary, and he came out of a 4-way primary with those 100 votes. And as Joe started to get invited to speak on panels and at conferences, he realized there was one consistent factor. Every time he got on stage to speak, he was sharing the stage with 2 or 3 other white guys that were all quite literally 2 or 3 times his age as this 21-year-old who had just been elected. And so Joe started to begin thinking about, how do we change that? How can we empower more young people to step up? Because Joe will be the first one to tell you he was no anomaly, right? He wasn't the student body president at our college. He wasn't a 4.0 student. He was just a young person that felt passionately and felt this call to action to get involved. And so then he started to really start thinking, how can we do that? And the original idea was actually just sort of a social networking group for young conservative elected officials. But then in 2019 at the Student Action Summit, Joe met a young gentleman named Elliot, who came up to him after a speech and said, hey, that was incredibly inspiring. I have the ambitions of running for office eventually. Joe turns around and said, well, why don't you do it now? Very similar to myself, Elliot had every excuse in the book. Well, I want to be a prosecutor. I want to go to law school, all of these things. And Joe kind of looked at him and said, look, once you become a prosecutor, once you have a family, those are all things that are going to take up time. So right now you are uniquely positioned to actually serve your constituents better than those people that you're going to be running against. And so Elliot ends up running in a suburban town up near White Bear Lake, Minnesota, against, first he ended up in a primary. He came out of the primary successful, but then in a pickup opportunity, he ends up losing by only 60 votes. And so with that, he also outperformed President Trump by, I believe, 5 points in that district, and is now running again. And so that was kind of the birth story of Run GenZ. Joe mentored him in a very unofficial way throughout his first race, but Joe realized we could do this on a mass scale. And so what we do now is we go around the country to recruit young people to step up and run for office in their 20s, and then we'll actually do district research for them and an analysis on the district to help them find an office that's not only winnable, but a viable seat for them, something that matches their strengths. And then we'll take it a step further and pair them with a young conservative elected official who has been in their shoes. They've been that 22-year-old, and Jordan, I'm sure you know from being involved in politics, you walk into those CEC meetings sometime, and you look around and you say, oh, crap, the same way Joe did when he was sharing the stage with other panelists, these people are 40, 50 years older than I am. And so the elected officials that we have brought into our coalition to mentor the young people we're recruiting have been in that situation and been successful.
So, and this is kind of a crucial time for Gen Z to start getting involved, right? And I think this aligns with the general stereotypes that go along with Gen Z, right? More practical, but very forward thinking, not willing to wait. I don't care who's next. I'm right here. Right. Which is something that I appreciate. I'm a Zennial, I guess. I'm in that weird in between millennials and Gen X, but for me, like, I wish there would have been a Run Gen Z when I was in college that was saying, hey, now is the time for you to get involved, get active, even if it wasn't in the pursuit of running for office, still being one of these the man behind the man, running campaigns, getting involved with huge volunteer programs and stuff like that. I guess since the start of Run Gen Z, how many new folks have you brought on board? I was looking through the website. You know, you've got a few Texans in there, including our good friend Joel Castro. You know, how many people are involved? How big is Run Gen Z at this point?
Absolutely. And so in 2021, which was at that time, it was pretty much myself as the only full-time member of the staff. And Joe Mitchell, who was still volunteering his time and actually still is to this day. But in that first year, we worked with about 15 candidates across the country. We saw 12 victories out of those 15. So we came out of that with an 80% success rate. And we are going on to this year. We're working with a total of 40 candidates, and we're excited to have a lot of those people that have either already won if they're in a local or a school board seat. But a lot of them are heading into November for their general election at the state legislative level. I want to say it's about 35 or 36 state level candidates that we're going to be tracking this November. But on the elected official side, what I always tell these people is that our model is really based on the retention of these candidates and bringing them into what we call our Rising Stars Club once they've been elected, so that in a year or two's time, I can call them and say, hey, this is Mason from Run Gen Z, councilman, representative, member. We've now got this new crop of candidates, and I would love to call on you to mentor one or two of them the same way that I asked Representative Mitchell or Representative Mariano to mentor you the first time that you were running. And so we've now built that coalition of elected officials that serve as our candidate mentors to 54. And that number continues to increase just about every week, us identifying a new elected official between the age of 18 and 35 to help us mentor the candidates we work with. And for that demographic, we're looking at 18 to 30.
So in the age range, right, you were just talking about this. Gen Z is what, born around 97? Is that, am I getting that right?
Yeah, 1997 to 2012 is I believe, kind of the most commonly used definition for Gen Z. Some people say that the numbers are pretty arbitrary, so you look at different things. Like one of them that I've seen for Gen Z is you're still a millennial if you know where you were on 9/11 back in 2001, right? So there's a lot of these different metrics, and we've kind of expanded our scope to that 18 to 30 age range, just because we had so many 26, 27-year-olds reaching out to us that we realized, look, we're turning away some of this young talent who will be the leaders of the conservative movement and ultimately of the country by not working with them now. And so that's how we settled on that 18 to 30 age.
Well, and one of those candidates here in Texas who fits into that age range is Caroline Harris, running to challenge James Tallarico, I believe, down in the Round Rock area. And I mean, it is important that we have young conservatives who are not just on the sidelines, out there in these battleground districts trying to fight and take back. Tallarico, when he came into the office, was the youngest Democrat at the time in the legislature, was treated as kind of this darling. But in terms of the policies that he tried to deliver, was completely against what the majority of Texans really want. So that's why it's good to have folks like Caroline Harris who are trying to get in the fight, take that seat back, make sure the legislature isn't overtaken by folks with some of these extreme policies. But, also folks like Joel, who we've got to talk about his headshot on the website. He looks like he photoshopped his face onto a boomer body. Like, I don't know what's going on with that, but we got to give him some new headshots. But
Joel will kill me for saying this, but whenever he shows up and I've got that headshot on something, he always looks at me and goes, "Why'd you put my catfish photo?"
Yeah. That is a perfect description of it. And all love in the world to Joel. He's been one of these young fighters doing it at the local level, which was my point before I got onto a tangent of teasing him. Having people who are willing to run, not just for the legislature, not just dreaming of Congress and, being the antithesis to AOC in the squad, but also getting involved within our communities, right? You don't have to have all of these big time connections or any connections really at all if you know your neighbors. So for those folks who are interested in getting involved, how do they get in touch with Run Gen Z, and what's kind of the process like?
Absolutely. And so if you're interested in just kind of a general inquiry, or you'd like to set up a conversation to do a one-on-one call to learn more, info at rungenz.com. Feel free to email that. We monitor it very closely. But for those of the listeners who know that they want to explore the idea of running for office, go to rungenz.com, and there's a tab in the top right portion of the screen that says Become a Leader. And that is kind of our application for the mentorship program. And as I alluded to earlier, once you do that, we kind of take our applicants through a job application process, for lack of a better term. And so we want to work with you all the way through the portion of figuring out what it is you're going to run for, what seat is best suited for you to run right now, or even in 1 or 2 years. Really quickly, Jordan, I'll go on kind of a tangent here. We had a young lady. This was about 4 or 5 months in. I was still figuring out exactly what Run Gen Z was as the executive director, as we were really taking shape in the organization. But we had this young lady. She reached out to us, and she puts in her application, look, I'm 16. I turn 17 next week. I've already checked with my attorneys. And that's where my ears kind of perked up. I was like, what 17-year-old or 16-year-old rather has got an attorney, right? But she says, I've already checked with them. They've told me that I can run for any state level office in this state as long as I'm 18 by the time I'm elected. And she goes on to tell me that she's going to run for the Secretary of State of this very, very blue state here in America, right? So I call her and I say, hey, this is Mason with Run Gen Z. First of all, I absolutely love your ambition, but what if we explored something that you're really going to be able to sink your teeth into and ultimately come out on the other side serving your community and making a tangible difference rather than a kind of a protest run or something of that nature, right? So we are now still in contact with this young lady and are looking at a possible city council or school board run for her in the next couple of years. And that's what I really think one of the beautiful parts about Run Gen Z is that we're not going to put you on a set timeline. We want to start working with you as soon as we can, put you in the position to best win an office soon, but then ultimately put you on the path to achieve your ultimate political ambition, whatever that might be, even if it's Secretary of State of one of these blue states that we're really not flipping in the next couple of years, right? But we may flip in the next 10 years. And we're going to have a proven, battle-tested candidate ready to step up and run for that position.
So you guys don't just have your eye on the next generation of leaders. You're also very focused in this upcoming cycle. Run Gen Z is partnering with several organizations, including Texas Young Republicans, for these border barnstorms. For those who don't know a bit about these, can you talk a bit about the barnstorms and how folks can get involved with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in a conversation probably about 6 months ago, was the first time I had this idea, and we were watching as we were leading up to the special election for now Congresswoman Flores. And I was starting to sit there and think, well, look, I'm from Texas. I'm not going to lie. I've got a bias making sure that we're playing very strong in this state. But why don't we take the fight to where it's necessary, right? Go to the most critical emerging battleground here in the country, the southern border, especially along the Texas southern border. And so I started reaching out to people like Wasim, people like Trey over at HRT, and pitching them this idea and say, look, we need to build a coalition of these organizations that are uniquely positioned to organize candidate and activist workshops all along there. And so we're incredibly grateful to specifically Wasim and Trey for stepping up to be the hosts of these events, where Run Gen Z and organizations like Texas Latino Conservatives and Libre can come in and provide the programming to arm these activists with the tools they need to ensure a successful midterm and continue that push to more of a red area in 2024. But also identify these young candidates that are going to be running this year, next year, 2024, 2025, whether it's state or a local office, so we can begin working with them now and helping them figure out what that exact position is that is going to ensure their victory when they come up to election day.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Myra. Where YRs are doing our own barnstorm of sorts with these big deployments throughout the cycle. And we're going to be focusing on Myra's district actually the 2 weekends before election day. So at the end of October, and we have many more deployments that people can go back and listen to earlier on as I'm handling our house business at the top of the show, and I'll run them to again after this. But May said, for those who, maybe of this Gen Z age group, or maybe a little bit older, they're in the fray, or they don't subscribe to the titles and they're just like, I was born in this year and that's all that matters. For the younger people in our audience who are listening about this, what are other ways that you encourage people to get involved if they're not quite willing to take the candidate step?
Absolutely. And so my background really comes from campaigns. I worked on my first couple up in Iowa. I had the opportunity to work on Congressman Jody Arrington's first runoff before he was a congressman out in West Texas in Abilene. And then most recently in 2020 on Senator Cornyn's team with, and then later Texas Victory in Dallas County. And so I couldn't stress enough the importance of just getting out to support these candidates, whether that's with a donation or through volunteering, even if it's just checking people in at an event. These campaigns, as you know, Jordan, and as I know a lot of young Republicans know, are very understaffed. I mean, campaigns are expensive, and all of that money can't simply go to manpower. So volunteer with these people, get involved as an activist. I recently became a precinct chair here in Denton County where I live, and also serve on the Young Republicans board up here as we try to get this group back off the ground. And so there's so many ways that you can get involved and make a difference, even if it's just telling your friends, look, we need you to vote conservative, or are you happy with how much you're paying at the gas tank? Absolutely not. Nobody is. Well, this Inflation Reduction Act is an exact example of why the Democrats aren't going to be fixing that, right? And so that's why we need to win back the House, win back the Senate, and then the White House in 2024.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Inflation Reduction Act, because there are so many clips out now of the Democrats and the Biden administration specifically, trying to reinforce these redefined narratives that they've created. Oh, it's not a recession. We're changing the definition of recession. Oh, this is inflation reduction, when, hundreds, and I mean hundreds of economists have come out and say that this will be negligible on the effect it will have on inflation. And they try to parse it out and say, well, no, you have to look at the tables. No, if you're going to call it something, then it damn sure better do what it's called, right? I mean, politics has gotten simple enough that, and since I was a kid, they have been talking about the game that is played in DC, and we know the titles never mean what they're supposed to, right? They're just called something nice, so it rolls off the tongue well when they're giving sound bites in the media. But we're not falling for it, and I'm glad that we've got people like you, Joe Mitchell, who are getting this next generation ready for the fight, because it's a long-term battle. This isn't a republic if you can keep it, right? That's the message that I think is finally getting down to the younger generations. For so long, there were so many other distractions in politics, and for whatever reason, let's call it the Donald J. Trump effect, right? People are paying attention to politics. They're getting involved, and this next generation is on the cusp of being big leaders up and down the ballot. Mason, is there anything, we didn't give the dates on these, so real quick, can you give us the dates on these border barnstorms that are coming up?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for reminding me. So we're going to be in El Paso this Saturday, actually, on August 20th. We'll be down in Laredo, Texas on September 10th. And then we're going to be rounding up with some presentations and some workshops actually at the Young Republicans Convention in McAllen on September 30th. So I'm excited to see you and all of the other young Republicans down there.
Yeah, convention will be a good time. A good chance for everyone to. I got to talk to Wasim. I think everyone should like have a taco as their name badge, right? And you can choose the taco that best represents you. Mason, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I know you got a million other things you're working on, but thank you for your work with Run GenZ. Thank you for taking time to come on the podcast. We know there's a lot of work to be done there in Dallas County alone. From Faith Johnson, who's running for DA, got to get Clay Jenkins out of that county judge role. My goodness, there is important work to be done across the Lone Star State, and it's great to see Run GenZ being on the front lines.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Jordan. And we'll see all y'all down in McAllen.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you again to Mason for joining us. Thank you to you for tuning in. As always, make sure you're sharing this podcast with your friends. Hit the share button if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube. Click the retweet link if you see us up on Twitter with links out to this. We need to try and get as many people paying attention, tuning in to what's happening in Texas politics. We want the Big Texas Podcast to be their source for that information. Again, a reminder, we talked about it during before the interview. We talked about it again with Mason, but in case you need another reminder, Texas YR deployments coming up this weekend, August 19th through 21st, Regional Weekend of Action. August 26th through 28th, Monica De La Cruz down in CD 15. September 9th through 11th, Wesley Hunt in CD 38. September 16th through 18th, Cassie Garcia in CD 28. October 14th, another regional weekend of action. Make sure you contact your local clubs. October 21st through 23rd is the big national deployment for Herschel Walker in Georgia. And then finally coming home, October 28th through 30th, Myra Flores, our congresswoman down on the border. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this week. We will bring you more guests coming up. We've got lots of candidates that we're trying to line up for interviews. If you want to be part of this podcast, make sure you reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Texas YRs. Till next time, friends, we'll see you down the trail.